Good afternoon, friends of the Museum of South Texas History. This is Francisco Guajardo, the Chief Executive Officer of the museum, and we welcome you to the August edition of Museum Pláticas. So today we're going to have a plática with a scientist. And so this scientist actually comes to us at a very appropriate time because we are like in the depth of hurricane season. And so this scientist, his name is William Mobley, will be in this plática with me about what he does as a scientist. He works for this place up at the University of Texas at Austin. It's called the Texas Advanced Computation Center, I think it is. He'll tell us about that in a second. But interesting stories from this one fellow because he actually comes from an area that's kind of like South Texas, like the Valley. He comes from the Panhandle of Florida. Then he goes off to college, and then he comes to Texas to do doctoral work at Texas A&M, and then he lands at UT as a research scientist. So we're going to have a conversation with him. He's going to give us kind of this perspective on how do you do mitigation, and how does he, with his team at TAC, Texas Advanced Computation Center. So we'll have that plática, but we also want to get to know him. And so, as you know, if you participate or you listen into these pláticas, first we want to get to know the person. So we do kind of a quick oral history, and then we move into the body of work, and we also move into, okay, how is South Texas connected to this? Okay, so stay with us, maybe about a minute and a half, and come back and join our plática with Will Mobley. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, friends of the Museum of South Texas History. So on this Friday afternoon, I and you, and all of you who are on Facebook Live, you're certainly welcome to chime in, ask questions like, who is Will? What's he talking about? One of the challenges I have to tell you is that before we got on the air, I said to Will, hey, well, you as a research scientist, how hard is it to make it understandable to the public? And he said, that's a big issue. in science. Well, welcome to South Texas.
Thank you. I'm
All right.
glad to be here.
Is this your first time in the Valley?
It is my first time in the Valley.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was, when there was the opportunity to come on here, I was really excited because I've heard a lot about the Valley, and Suzanne does a lot of work. My boss, Suzanne, does a lot of work here. And so I hear all these amazing stories about this area and y'all's passion for it. And I really wanted to come down and actually be able to see everything that you guys have done.
So, and you just traveled this morning.
Yes.
So did you come in a car or a truck, or what did you come in? Or did you take a bus?
No, I rode my motorcycle in this morning.
You rode your motorcycle? I knew that. I just had to set you up for that. But, so what is it about a research scientist riding motorcycles? Is that because, like Pam said, he's the guy who says that he has the data? Or he knows, he's a statistics guy, he said.
Yeah.
What is that statistic?
So when I was first getting my motorcycle, I started looking into just some of the mortality data, and there's some flaws in that data. I'll just say that right now. But I was justifying it to my wife at the time, and I was like, look, the mortality data for motorcycles is everyone's under like 26 years old. They're up in their middle age. This is 5 years ago, so I was 30, and they were like 45, 50 years old with brand new motorcycles, or they're drinking. And that's 90% of the mortalities or something like that. And I can't tell you the exact number, but it's a considerable number for those, right? Because it's new people on motorcycles, or you're really young and stupid. And that's where I was at, right? I'm glad I started at 30 and not at 20 years old, because I would have driven 120 and crashed it. So for me, it was looking at that data, digging into it, and finding out what those causes are, and then not doing those things, not being one of those factors. So my wife and I have this rule where it's like one beer tops, really, for that. If I have more than that, I'm not taking the bike. So if we're going out, chances are I'm not riding my motorcycle. So.
You live in Austin?
Yes.
Okay, but you are relatively new to Austin, are you?
Yes, I've been there 2 years now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And before Austin, you were.
Before Austin was Houston. Before that was Fort Worth. Prior to that was Galveston, and then College Station. And that was 2013 was College Station, and then before that was Wisconsin.
Okay. And so College Station is where you did a PhD in what?
So I started my PhD in urban and regional sciences with a disaster mitigation focus. So I started that in College Station, and then spent 2 years in Galveston finishing it up.
I see. You are from Florida?
Yeah, mostly.
Well, where were you born? Where'd you go to high school?
So I was born in Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas, and then in the super tiny town of Opelo. Well, we had a farm on this super tiny town in Opelo. It was like 68 people when we were there. But then my dad went to finish his PhD, and so we started moving with that. And then I went to high school in Florida. So I spent 7-8 years in Florida, I think is what it ended up being. Yeah.
And what did your dad do a PhD in?
Ecology. So he did, he focused on biology, and then population ecology, I believe is what it was. So he was looking at cardinals and how they breed for it. So,
Cardinals?
Yeah, that's as far as I know on that one.
And where is your father now?
So he's retired. He lived in Fort Worth for quite a while with my mom, and then when she retired, both of them moved back to Paraval, Arkansas. Yeah. So,
was that the same tiny town? That was another town, right?
Yeah, it's 30 minutes away or something like that. Yeah. So my mom's from Paraval. All of the family is in that general area, and then my dad was a farmer in Opelo.
Okay. So, and your mother did what?
Everything. She jokes she had 1,000 jobs. So she's worked at paper mill for 15 years. She's done paint. She's done managing Subway. You name it, she's done it. And, which is really nice for me because anytime I have a problem, I just call her up right away and she's like, oh yeah, I did this. This is the easy way of doing it.
Well, yeah, good. She's got a wide skill set.
Yeah.
So your father being, do you call him an ecologist? Is that the word or not?
Yeah, an ecologist or a biologist.
Okay.
So when we were in Florida, he was the biologist for the Tyndall Air Force Base. So his job was managing the bears, the alligators. Like if there was an alligator on the road, the colonels would call him up and complain, and he would have to go out there if it was under 6 foot and move it himself. But anything to do with snakes, any of those types of things, that's what he was dealing with. But then also helping support the planning for the prescribed fires that they did on there. So they had a 3-year rotation of wildfire that they needed to manage, because if they didn't, you would have a wildfire that was happening while one of the jets was going off, and then you could get in a lot of trouble.
Wow.
So they wanted to manage that as well as they could.
Where'd you go to high school in Florida?
Rutherford High School. So it's Springfield, Florida. So it's in Panama City, but it's like one of the small subsets of towns there. Yeah.
Okay. And why University of Wisconsin lacrosse?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I wrestled through high school. I was a pretty good wrestler. I qualified for state twice. Had a bad state my second year and didn't place. Beat one of the guys who placed but didn't place. And one of the assistant coaches had wrestled in lacrosse and was an All-American, and he basically came to train with me, and so he convinced me to go check out lacrosse and to try that out for wrestling. So I spent a couple of years there wrestling and kind of figuring out what I wanted to do with my career. So
Now, Wisconsin is a state that takes its wrestling very seriously. Is that it?
Yes, it does. They are really good at it.
I mean, I would think more than a lot of the southern states.
I mean, you've got some good guys that come out of the South. Wisconsin is pretty good at what they do, though, when it comes to wrestling. Yeah.
There was a big guy who won like a gold medal. You know, he was kind of a character, like, I don't know, 16 years ago, 20 years ago. He was from Wisconsin. I remember that he got all kinds of endorsements, like for ice cream and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, whatever.
Yeah.
But he was a Wisconsinite, I think is what. No, is it Wisconsinite?
No,
What do you call it?
the Wisconsin Madison are the Badgers.
Okay. No, but if you're from Wisconsin, you are a Wisconsin.
Oh, Wisconsinite. Okay,
Yeah,
I thought you were saying
yeah.
Wisconsin Knight.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh no.
Yeah.
So what did you study at lacrosse?
So I did geography. So, and then focused on GIS. So, spatial information, which is something that like clicked with me once I started doing it. So it's a lot of cartography, a lot of mapping, but then it's also a lot of analysis and how to twist spatial data to answer the questions you want. And so,
Describe spatial data. Is that satellite stuff?
it can be.
What is spatial data?
Spatial data is basically any data, right? Like anything that you can say this has a location, it's spatial.
Okay.
Even if that is an abstraction of the data. So if we wanted to say that we have carpet here, we can say that's spatial data. We can map that, right? But then we could also say, well, this is gray, this is brown carpet data, and we can kind of create those abstractions within it. So we can start to build more information on it based off of how it is in space.
Right. Because I was actually captivated by the idea of spatial data, maybe, when we had a conversation with Gordon Wells, which was really about that stuff that's up in the skies.
Yeah, so remote sensing is a huge part of spatial data. So it's remote sensing is where you have a satellite that is capturing information from a sensor, and it's basically going cell by cell and picking up this information. And you can get a very large area and get very high resolution. So back when I was in school, it was like 30 meter was the best. So then now if you talk to Gordon, I'm sure he's talking about like sub-foot type of stuff with this very high resolution data. So it's so much information, and we have to be able to start to dig into that information because it requires a lot of data, or it's a lot of data, which means a lot of storage, and we need a lot of computational power to actually start to manipulate that data.
Okay. Well, the reason you're here is because this museum, the Museum of South Texas History, has a relationship with the University of Texas through their Planet Texas initiative. And so TAC, I'm guessing, is very involved with the Planet Texas initiative. And so the reason that we have that relationship is because Suzanne Pierce, who you've referenced already, who's a research scientist up at UT, so she and I had a conversation once about maybe, 3 years ago or so, where she was looking to partner with people in South Texas around the idea of disaster mitigation. And so South Texas is like a disaster place in terms of natural disasters. And we get hurricanes, we flood, we have droughts, we have freezes. I mean, it's a lot of stuff that happens here. This is like, a vortex for a lot of stuff that happens. And in fact, when the Spanish first came, like in the 1750s, they had been here before, but 1750s when they began to write a lot. I mean, they were writing in the 1600s as well. But, one of the things that they say is that this place is harsh. Not only the flora and the fauna, but, just hang out a little bit and you'll get something. Like you'll get a hurricane or you'll get a flood, and a lot of that was like unmitigated. And so there are records of people telling us, and even the native people were kind of like winter Texas. They didn't live here. They came here to forage, and then they go up to the Nueces. These were not permanent settlers here. It wasn't until the Spanish came when then they said, well, our worldview is that we come and we colonize. The native people knew better. They interacted with the earth, and they didn't want to live here because this is hard. This is hard, and so Planet Texas at UT, this initiative, the Museum of South Texas History, paying attention to history, paying attention to South Texas. So we got into that conversation, and Suzanne said, I think I want to be part of this, where we can help you make sense of the science of the history of disasters that you guys have experienced. And that's how you come in. Because you're part of that team with Suzanne. And so today, for example, we're doing this. Tomorrow, you're going to be here for a bit to do part of a community learning exchange where we encourage people to talk with each other and that sort of thing. But the question to you then is, okay, this thing that I laid out, that some scientists up at UT are helping us to understand it through modeling or projections or whatever it is. Talk to our audience about what it is that you do as a scientist that can help us be better about how to be ready for a hurricane or some kind of disaster. What do you do?
Sure. So my role as a research scientist is to help develop tools for specifically for decision support. And so it's the idea that we're working with state agencies, we're working with anyone really who's trying to make a decision and wants to work with us on helping to develop the tools so that we can do that in a more informed manner. And some of that comes down to just getting the proper problem formulation, talking with the community, whether that is the state agency or whether that's working with stakeholders at the neighborhood level, to actually listen to what they're saying and then come back with quantifiable ways, hopefully quantifiable, it's not always, but hopefully quantifiable ways that we can say, this is what your problem is. And with disasters, it's relatively easy. We don't want to flood in here. That could be your problem. But it also could just be a symptom of the problem, right? And so we work with the groups to develop this problem formulation. And then we have been doing a lot actually with the Texas Water Development Board about helping to make their their models that they've got this huge library of models that they've been developing, that they have for the planning mandates that they have in every single watershed across Texas. They're developing these models, and so we're helping them catalog and organize those so that those will be actually useful to quantify the flooding that could be happening, so that we can go from that problem formulation to actually quantifying the problem and then starting to put in what I call interventions. They can be a policy, they could be a structural dam, levee, those types of things. It could be anything that is reducing the impact of the flooding, of the impact. So we can put in those interventions into the model and actually quantify how it changes. And once we do that, we can see if it's an acceptable or if it does not avert the risk to the decision maker's opinion, right? And then they can make a more informed decision. So that's what we try to do, is develop the systems that allow us to do that easily, and to reduce the expertise, so that the subject matter expert may be able to set up a flood model once. And then our goal is to have it where anyone who wants to make a decision off of it can use that model. They can have enough knowledge in the system that they can understand what's happening and tweak maybe a few variables, but still have a valid model.
So you provide data, different kinds of data sets to help people who live there make decisions better. Is this what it is?
That's the end goal, yeah.
That's the end goal?
Yeah.
Okay. Give us an example. Like you did something in Galveston, you did something in Houston, you know, you haven't been with TAC long, and so I'm not sure what those experiences have been, but give us an example of how you've gone to work on this.
So a few of the different ones we've kind of worked on in decision support. When I was at A&M, we were developing risk models or working with engineers to develop a flood risk model and then quantify how those damages played out. I actually, a good example of this is I worked with some Dutch engineers, and so they had a storm surge model for Houston, and they were able to assess, given any type of surge intensity, they could do a wide variety of those and measure how their mitigative actions. So they were looking at the Ike Dike, they were looking at let's see here, I think they were looking at inland barriers as well. They had 9 of them, multiple lines of defense that they wanted to play out and see what were optimal ways of measuring this and looking at the cost benefit of it. So we were able to pull data from the Houston tax assessment for their parcels, and I helped them quantify damages based off of how much flooding actually happened. And so then they could bring in their surge model and we could iterate over this, and I think we were iterating it like 10,000 times and then being able to back into what were good approaches to start to explore.
Mm-hmm. When you said it was some Dutch, is it modelers or scientists or who?
They're hydraulic engineers, hydrologic engineers.
Okay, so Dutch engineers who are doing
this. TU Delft was with the group that I was at and helping with.
And so this is, I'm guessing, especially coastal communities, have developed some kind of capacity, right, to do research and to do kind of mitigation. Who's leading in that?
In coastal mitigation?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the Dutch.
The Dutch?
Yeah.
How's that? I mean, the Dutch don't have as many resources as the Americans.
So in the 1950s, they had a catastrophic flood. And while I was over there, they told me this history several times, and so it was really exciting to learn about how they went about it, because they decided after their catastrophic flood, they weren't going to have any more of them, and so they funded. And the Dutch is We'd have to back up a little bit. Not most of the land, but quite a bit of the land around Amsterdam has been taken back from the sea. Like they've made their own land. Where I was at in Delft was 18 meters under sea level.
Wow.
They've always had the mitigation actions to, if you think of the Dutch with their windmills, those are water pumps. They're pumping water out so they can have it where it wants it. So in the 50s, when it flooded and it was catastrophic, they put their resources towards it to find ways that it wouldn't happen. And so now, despite the fact that every winter or every third winter, they have these major storm surge events that are winter storms coming in, they don't flood the same way. And so they aren't having those catastrophic events year over year. And so they're really good at what they do.
Back in the mid to late 1950s, the Army Corps of Engineers wrote a report saying that it would take this much resource to do drainage properly in South Texas. And there was this much resource pumped. They said you need this much, and there was this much in South Texas.
Yeah.
And we have for years been, and this is kind of a rough critique, but nickel and diming it. You know, I mean, by nickel and diming, I'm talking about we passed a bond issue for $190 million.
Yeah.
But we need $500 million to be able to do, say, drainage appropriately.
So just to put in perspective really quickly, do you know how big the valley is in comparison to Houston? Like just space-wise?
I don't know for sure, but I would say that the metropolitan statistical area of Houston would be probably what Hidalgo County and Cameron County are.
Okay. So fairly similar?
Kind of, but the valley is in Stark County, and it's also Willacy County.
Okay.
I think that the valley is 140 miles
okay.
Up and down the river, and then another like 60 miles north and south.
Okay, so bigger.
It's bigger. This is bigger, but obviously not as congested as Houston, unless you take, but even then, no, northern Mexico.
Okay. Well, I just wanted a quick slice because I'm not as familiar with the valley, so I figured I would ask you and you would have an answer. So a comparable, the reason why the Dutch can do what they do is I believe they have a similar population of Texas in an area that's the size of Houston. So they're not defending all of Texas, they're defending a small part, right? So, and if the valley is less population but larger, right, like that's why there's an issue there, right? There's that disconnect of, well, we don't have the population, which isn't inherently a bad thing, because if you don't have the population, they're not in the way of the storm, which is a good thing. But it's not good for the people that are there too, right? And so it's you have to play in this realm of realizing that we're one big community and then still take care of it.
So it may be incomparable. It could be apples and oranges in one way, right? Because I mean, you do a good job of describing that. So the Dutch are here, and so they can laser focus on this small area, and we are like all over the place. But here's the thing, though. You can make a commitment. You can make a public, resource commitment. And I think that in the United States, that tends to be very tricky because it's constant negotiation, it's political, it's economic, it's a lot of different things. But I wonder about that. And so this is, why I am very keen on understanding what is the language that we can use to convince people that we need significant investment in disaster mitigation. Because if people are not convinced, then the political whims control. So in the absence of a knowledgeable populace, body politic, if you will. And so I think that this is why you're here. This is why we are, in relationship with UT at Austin and Planet Texas and TAC, because we want to understand this, and we want to also have access to the language to be able to talk about this in English and in Spanish with our community.
Yeah.
And I for one don't feel that I'm there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what tomorrow's about, you know, learning exchange. So that, and you see it tomorrow. It's not going to be a lot of scientists, a few, because we don't want all scientists.
No, I mean everyone is their own expert. That's the first thing you have to, like, when you start working with communities, you have to realize that they are the expert, right? We could talk about street flooding, and I guarantee you they know more than I do in this area, right? Your community experiences it. They know. When I was in Galveston, I knew exactly which roads not to take my scooter on, because it was going to be 3 foot of water, and my scooter didn't take it, right? Those are things you learn by being there, being the expert, and you can't model that well yet. They're working on it. There's some great people at Texas that are working on those types of flooding models. Paolo Pasalacqua's group is doing some great work on that, but in the end, you still have the experts in the community that have to be addressed, and we have to identify where those areas are. I will also say that this is a little bit of a change, but it's still around that same issue, which is flooding is a very abstract problem until it's flooding. It is very difficult to envision a high-risk storm that could happen in the future. If I tell you it, you're like, all right, well, yeah, it might flood, and you imagine probably the last place it flooded here, and that may not be it, right? It may be something different entirely. And so that's something that's very difficult to do, and people are working on that. And one of the ways to do that, and why this is a great partnership, is looking at that history. We can look at the Beulah, right? And we can show how that happened in the past, because that's the major event here. And I know the Corps is actually working on shifting where events are and showing how that changes things, right? Because if Beulah hit 90 miles to the north, it may not have hurt this area as bad. If it went south a little bit, it may be worse surge, right? And so the next event could be that. And so there are ways of working with y'all to start to express how history can inform what we're doing in the future.
There was an oral history that I saw of a woman who was a member of the King family from the King Ranch.
Okay.
So the King Ranch, one of the largest ranches in the world.
I know their trucks.
Yeah, they have really cool trucks. But in the King Ranch, it was so disastrous, Beulah was, for the cattle.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's a story you'll never hear.
Yeah.
But she said Beulah did a number on our livestock. So there's that too.
Yeah. And that's very difficult for a scientist to identify. And again, that goes back to that expertise, right? Like, I could make up a number on how much that was lost, and I could try to look at the risk of cattle in this area. I'm going to be wrong. Like, I assume, I haven't actually done that literature review, so I don't know what people are doing, but I assume I would be wrong. My knowledge of cattle is that if you run over a cow in North Texas on federal land, it is $10,000 fine to pay for that cow and every cow that it could have had. So that's all I know about prices of cows. I did not run one over. Some other people on a fire engine did. Those numbers are out there. So the King Ranch knows how much those losses are, right? And so they're the expert. And so bringing them in, bringing that problem formulation would be great to start to be able to quantify that and understand how Beulah could inform how these new disasters could happen as well, and what those impacts could potentially be for them.
So tomorrow, one of the things that we're all going to see is a kind of a mini documentary that the local ABC affiliate produced. It's not a long piece. It's like maybe a 25-minute piece that we whittled down to about 15 minutes. But it talks about facing the fury. And so one of the points that Facing the Fury makes is to evacuate. How important it is to evacuate. But nobody evacuates around here. I mean, some do, but mostly people do not evacuate. I mean, I'm not evacuating, right? And most people are not evacuating. It's like this kind of like need to be there to take care of your little plot or your little casita, little house. What is the psychology around this and the lessons that you've learned, say, from Houston or Galveston or Beaumont or wherever you study?
I'm not going to speak to Houston because it's contentious. Houston is very dense, right? And so there's whether you should evacuate or not evacuate, just dependent on where the storm is several days in advance. Because if you don't evacuate in time, you can have more deaths by people being on the road, right? And that's not what I want to talk about because that's not my research. I'm not an expert on that. I can talk about my own history, though, as I grew up in Florida. I went through, I think I boarded up my windows at my house 6 or 7 times getting ready for winds. Like, we were on the coast, so we had quite a few hit. The worst was Ivan. That was a Cat 3, I think, when it hit. And we went up to my family in Arkansas for that one. I was a junior in high school, so I was like calling all of my friends and like seeing who was okay and all of those things. And one guy had a tornado run across his like the house, like across the bay, but everyone else was fine, like no big deal. And so, but most of the hurricanes we did, and we just stayed through it. And my dad grew up in he spent some time in New Orleans during one of their major ones. I can't remember the name of it, but it was like a Cat 4, Cat 5 that went through.
That would have been in maybe the 70s?
Yeah. And so they stayed, they had their door blown off, and they had their window shattered. He had to run outside during the eye of the storm to find something to cover it, right? And so, and then you always talk about these people that are proud survivors, right? They go have their hurricane parties, and I'm sure they have those here too, right? Where like every place I've lived on the coast goes through hurricanes, and certain people are going to stay. And I can't speak to why and whether that's the best option. I think that there is a risk threshold for everyone, where you probably shouldn't be there. But also, if you can leave, because not everyone can, right? Like, not everyone has the ability to hop in a car and just take off. Or, they may have cattle that they care about. And I would not question anyone who wants to make sure that their livestock are okay, right? Like, because it's another life. And so that's just my view on it, right? Like, if it was a horse, it would be the same thing for me. It's just like, well, you got to watch out for the horse. If you can't trailer it and take it off, then you stay too, maybe. Like, that's so there's all this like all of these ideas that could be going through with this to justify whether it's okay or not. And then it does fundamentally come down to what you consider too much risk. And so for us in the Panhandle, it was Cat 3s. Cat 3s, we were gone. I slept through Cat 2s and below. So.
Yeah, I don't know that we have a threshold that is publicly spoken about.
No, I think it's everyone has their own.
Their
right?
own.
Yeah, like I know other people that would leave well before that.
Yeah.
And like with my wife, she's from Wisconsin. And so when we were in Houston or Galveston, she would always worry about anything that was coming through. And I would be like, all right, well, what's the level on this one? Where's it going to hit? No, we're probably fine. Like, and then we had one that was pretty big that ended up just south of us that we were like, oh, we probably should have left. This isn't good. So, there's not a good way of deciding that information. Listen to the people who are making the decision, right? If they ask you to evacuate,
right,
you probably should. But
right.
Otherwise, everyone's going to have their own decision.
What, if you could impart a little bit of wisdom to the folks here who, in the next couple of days, we could get a warning, right? I mean, there's a hurricane that's brewing in the Gulf of Mexico. What is the wisdom, given your understanding as a scientist, that is kind of like general, generic wisdom? Like this, Facing the Fury says evacuate. Facing the Fury says, board up your windows. Facing the Fury says, interestingly, tomorrow we're going to have somebody from the A&M system come in and teach us how to prepare food when you don't have electricity.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is kind of an interesting thing, right? Because, evacuate, but then here's how you can prepare food. But yeah, it's kind of like words of wisdom given the preponderance of your understanding here through review of lids, but also through a practitioner.
Yeah, and going back to that, well, teaching how to cook and say evacuate, again, you're not going to get everyone to evacuate.
Right.
So teach the next best thing. Teach what's going to work for everyone, or for as many as you can, and try to hit with a broad brush. My knowledge of the valley is that it's pretty flat and the water goes everywhere, right? So if you're building, build high. Put it on pillars, because then hopefully it doesn't wash away. That's a big one on the coast. Don't build in a floodplain. Don't buy in a floodplain. There are maps of it. It's not always easily able to find that information, but you don't want to be there.
Well, sorry to interrupt, but floodplain is where the cheaper land is.
Oh yeah, I know that.
And so this is where colonias tend to pop up.
Yeah, it's still
very common.
Build high.
Yeah.
Like if you're gonna do it, build high and build strong. But I know these are not always the easy things to do, right? Like these are best case scenarios. So it's, yeah, try not to be in the way of water if it's there, and if it starts rising, get out of the way. And hopefully you're not too late. And so listen when they say evacuate. You'd have to ask someone else how long it takes to rise in certain areas, because that's an important thing to know, right? Is if I'm in a canyon out in West Texas and it starts raining, I don't want to be there, because the water is going to rise very quickly, and I love hiking, and so if it starts raining, we'll just turn around, because if it starts rising, you can get stuck very quickly and it can be very dangerous. If valleys take a little bit longer to do that, you have that information to know about, but you should still be listening when they say get out.
Yeah. One of the issues that has been kind of a chronic issue here is whether we have the appropriate infrastructure to help people get out. The valley for a long time has been under construction, with Highway 281 and Highway 83.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, if you live in the populated areas of, say, Pharr or San Juan or McAllen, to get out of McAllen because, the roads are under construction.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of the growing pains. And so to get out, I think, evacuate, I think people are sort of sobered by that, because this is going to be hard. I'm going to be stuck in the line for a long, long time.
Yeah, and that's why I won't touch the evacuation part, because that's the same thing with Houston, right? We lived in Galveston. It was like, all right, we'll leave. It's going to take me 6 hours to get through Houston. Hopefully, is it worth it, right?
Yeah.
So you leave early if you can, and that's not always an option either, right? Because you have work to do. My wife worked at she worked at a neurological group, so she was taking care of people who had long-term traumatic brain disorders or brain damage, and so she couldn't leave because the day after the hurricane, she had to be there to take care of them. There's no options for those people, right? So there are always going to be those people that can't leave, and so it's. I don't know there's no easy answer to this.
Yeah. And tomorrow you'll get to meet people who, come from county government, maybe some engineers, and then you'll meet a good number of people who are advocates of folks who live in colonias. In fact, they themselves live in colonias, and so, this is their life's work. They advocate, for under-resourced communities. So you're going to meet some of those folks tomorrow, and so that'll be a good thing. So, Will, as we wrap up this Plática, you had a chance to walk through the galleries.
Yeah, I did. They were. I really enjoyed it.
Good. So the way we have them structured is that we have river frontier, and so this is where you saw the mammoth, and you saw the Cretaceous period, and you saw the diorama of the native people here, and then so we have frontier, then we have highway, river highway, and so highway is because of the steamboat, and so the steamboat first went up and down the Rio Grande in 1829.
Okay.
And the last one went up and down in 1904. Now, in 1829 is when the river was close to half a mile wide. Today, it is like a fraction of that.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there's Crossroads down here, which is 20th century. And then you went to the jail as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we have those 4 permanent exhibits: Frontier, Highway, Crossroads, and then the jail as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we are right now mounting an exhibit on some gold that we got.
Oh, cool.
400 gold coins that this guy buried under his house in 1933 during the Great Depression. He was a small town doctor in this town called San Diego. He buried the gold because he didn't want to give it up to the government during the Depression.
Yeah.
And then that gold, many years later, almost 100 years later, would be unearthed by, it's actually in 2002. It was found by a plumber. And so there's this like amazing story of how that happened.
That's so cool.
And so we're developing the exhibit for that. And so that would be upstairs in the jail. I'm not sure if you got a chance to see that. But
I think there was stuff like being developed there, and I just
you wouldn't. Yeah. So any last thing that you want to say? Observation about what you do at work, or maybe first impressions of the valley. Whatever.
Yeah, it's been really cool. I'm excited to be here, and had some coffee from
Grind.
Yeah, had delicious coffee when I got here, so that helped me cool off after my nice ride. But yeah, I'm excited to be here. Excited for tomorrow too, to talk with people and hear stories, hear some of that, because that's how I learn, and I try to take all of that in. Every time I can hear someone, it's going to change my opinion on science, right? And so hopefully they can do the same and listen on how we can start to bring the science in and make it understandable so that people can make better informed decisions. And so we can all kind of learn and just start to mitigate everyone's risk as much as we can. Just trying to keep everyone out of flooding. So.
Well, thank you for coming down, and for being part of a museum Plática, and look forward to tomorrow.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate it. Okay, folks. So this is our August 2023 installment of Museum Pláticas. So stay tuned to a lot of stuff that's happening here at the museum. As I suggested, we have a gold exhibit that we're developing, and so we're gonna open that exhibit on the 7th of September, and then the community will be able to come and see the exhibit and see the very cool story of that. We have a learning exchange tomorrow, talking about the history of hurricanes and disaster mitigation, and so we historicize everything that we do here, and so we bring in people like Will and scientists to help us understand it. And so we will be back next month with the next Museum Plática, so everybody take care, and we will see you soon. So long. All right, so that was like maybe 45 minutes.